I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award-winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Hello and welcome to Just Justice. My name is Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host. Today's guest is someone whose life story is a testament to what transformation, perseverance, and purpose look like. Damon Sharuka Venable was arrested at 16 for serious first-degree offenses. He was tried as an adult and convicted and sentenced to 50 years to life. He served 35 years inside New Jersey prisons before being released in 2021, and he hit the ground running. Sharuka now serves as Community Affairs and Policy Specialist with the New Jersey Office of the Public Defender. He has spoken at universities and law schools up and down the East Coast. He's worked alongside the New Jersey Governor and the Attorney General. And he's the author of the memoir, A Beautiful Pain, the story of a violent juvenile offender sentenced to life in prison at 16 and his transformation into a community advocate. Sharuka Venable, welcome to Just Justice.
Jessica Henry, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you. So let's just jump right in by going back in time, if you
Sure.
don't mind. Let's go all the way back to your childhood in New Jersey in the 1980s. I think you and I are the same age, actually. So the 80s meant
Mm,
something to both of us. But take
right.
us back, if you will, to the beginning, or back to your childhood in the 1980s. What were the conditions like for you that shaped who you were at the age of 16?
Okay, sure. I grew up, I was born in 1969. So, we could fast forward to the 80s because that's the period of time that really shaped my life, altered the trajectory of my life. I grew up in a two-parent household, in the very West Ward in Newark. Poor working class family. Poverty was a really big factor, pronounced factor in our life. As I said, my father was a seasonal contractor, so money was extremely tight if at all. So poverty is a very central and extreme factor in my life. But I came from, like I said, a two-parent household, very loving family, man. They sheltered us as much as they could, protected us, and all of my siblings, we were very thankful about the protection that they gave us. Yeah, so I grew up in a very violent area of Newark as well. So yeah.
I know that you were in school, you were always considered a really good student,
Right,
but you
yeah.
also got involved in some of the street stuff pretty early and pretty seriously.
Stepping outside my door was a very, very violent environment. As a kid, I was very I had a penchant for reading at that time, so I read a lot of science books. I was a nerd, and but that aspect of my life, growing up in the conditions that I was in at the time, that kind of like was like a marker, a target on your back for being bullied and stuff like that, right? And so that's what I was facing with a lot too, a lot of bullying. And I came from a household where my father was he was 10 toes down, direct, tough guy. Like, I'm not going to
Right.
let my boys be bullied. Yeah, yeah. He was a loving father. I have nothing bad to say about that man. I love him to death. But he just was like, I'm going to instill in my boys, you're going to defend yourself, whether you like it or not. And so that began kind of the trajectory um, of of a path that I would take, and where violence would become like my primary default language. Before I was a jovial kid, just laughing and stuff like that, a jokester, didn't like fight. But stepping outside the door, dealing with bullying and being told not to accept bullying, it just kind of like changed my whole fun loving nature. And once I began to, become good at using violence as an effective means of communication, all bets were
Mm,
off.
mm,
And unfortunately, I dived deep into that violent aspect of my community violence, stuff that you would read about, gun-toting, young thugs and, just reckless wanton. Yeah, I jumped head into that.
Yeah, and you were just 16
Right.
um,
Yeah.
when you committed your crime, the robbery and
Yes.
murder that landed you in prison for life.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
were tried as an adult. And I'm wondering, you
Hmm.
know, what that was like for you at
Oh, wow.
16 to face those adult charges, knowing kind
Yeah.
of what had happened.
Mm-hmm. Jessica, when I look back, I'm a grown man now, executive functions fully developed and everything like that. When I look back at how I handled that experience, to be honest with you, I don't know how I really dealt with that situation because it's a very traumatic situation. You're young, at the time I was young. I couldn't fully process the processes that were uh, I was forced to deal with, that was life altering, And so, unfortunately I had a strong mom who was there every step of the way, and she
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand the system, but
Mm-hmm.
she would be there with her pen and her notepad at every process, And so that kind of motivated me to say like, okay, even though I don't know what's really going on, I have somebody who has my back. And I think that's what really kind of saved me because the process is very traumatic itself and very violent, just imagine, you're a kid and your body is like in total is in captivity basically. Like
Yeah.
you're taken away, and it was very traumatic. And I understand I was locked up for serious stuff, and I never tried to avoid punishment. I was willing to take accountability. However, if you understand Miller v. Alabama, the developmental science around juveniles, it was just too much for me to, really fully process. And that and the system uses that as a detriment. And this is why,
Mm-hmm.
the importance of Miller v. Alabama and the five Miller factors is so crucial in giving juveniles, a second opportunity at life because you just don't know how to navigate, this complex legal process. And unfortunately, I was given 50 years
Yeah.
because I didn't know. Yeah, I had no clue as to how to navigate. And attorneys, it was a lot of racism there. There's a lot of attorneys that really just didn't care. And so unfortunately, yeah. But navigating that process was like a tremendous, tremendous traumatic experience.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And just as an aside for listeners who don't know what Miller versus Alabama says, the Supreme Court has sort of taken a look at offenses that are committed by people when they are juveniles, and they've said that people cannot be mandatorily sentenced to life without parole,
Correct.
that
Yes.
juveniles have to have individualized evaluations. And so that kind of has transformed the landscape for for people who committed crimes as juveniles. But there you were. You did get this tremendously long sentence for this crime that you committed. Um,
Yes.
and in prison, you had some really tough choices to make. And I want to talk about something you said in your book. We're going to get into your book in a little bit, but you said
Okay.
something about trying to figure out how to let the hope in, how to let hope in. And I just was so struck by that because prison is a place that can be very, very hopeless. And it takes something to let the hope in. And I'm wondering why you thought that was so important to do. You actually made a decision about that.
Right. Well, and so for me, right, I was so, I was trapped in the whole my, I concept and approach to life. It was just all about me, which was typical of most kids, right? You're Eurocentric, right? You're egocentric. And so I just had realized that I needed to, step outside of that. I needed to do something. Excuse me. I needed to expand my perception of reality and myself. And I disappointed a lot of people, that love me, particularly my mom and my dad, right? And so even in prison the first 10 years, I was a maniac, just still acting wild and catching charges, fighting COs, and just I thought I was in my coffin. So but, and then, because I was hopeless. I was in a hopeless situation. I was around individuals who dying in prison, weren't sentenced to death sentences, but because of parole and because of their failure to so-called adjust to prison life, they did way more time than they had to. And the body is finite, right? So, you figure 20, 25, 30 years, that's a long time. And a lot of people succumb, like cancers and bad eating habits and stuff like that. So I've seen a lot of individuals die. So for me, I thought that was my coffin. I thought that was going to be my future. And but at one point, so I was walking around very hopeless. And but I got tired of disappointing my parents, right? And I know I needed to have some hope. I needed something other than myself. And so my mom had great hope. My mom used to always say, when you get out, when you get out, when you get out. I mean, I used to be like, Mom, can you stop? And she never stopped. When you get out, she's like, I know you come. I mean, she never stopped saying, like, I know you're going to get out. And I was just like, my God, right? And but then it infected me, and that's where the hope comes in. I started believing what she believed, and I made it come to fruition, if that makes sense.
Well, you sure did. I mean, while you were in prison, you were able to enroll in Rutgers University, which is
Yeah.
kind of amazing. And what's even more amazing is you had a 4.0
Oh, yeah.
GPA,
Yes,
which is
yes, yes.
exceptional on the
Right,
outside, but
right,
particularly
yeah.
exceptional on the inside.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
what role would you say that education played for you?
I'm a lover of philosophy. I like to call myself a philosopher first before anything, because that is what really kept me alive and saved me, right? And so there's this saying, a man without education is a savage.
Mm.
Pythagoras, I believe, said that. And I remember reading that. I literally remember reading that, and I was like, man, this is you.
Oh,
Like this,
wow.
this explains me. And so I thought I wanted to be a tough guy, right? I never backed down from a fight. I intimidated guys. I used intimidation tactics. I didn't care if you were, you know, um, mafia or Colombian gangsters. I didn't care. Gangbangers. If you wanted something I wanted, so I had a kind of like a tough guy chip on my shoulder, right? And I just remember telling myself, well, if I keep going down this road, it's not going to end well for me, right?
Hmm.
I'll either hurt somebody or I'll get
Hmm.
killed, and I won't get out. So I knew I had to change, right? So I just turned the frequency, if you will. So that tough guy persona that I had, that chip on my shoulder, I put a chip on my shoulder to be an academic all-star. So like when college, so I had already gotten college credits and a college degree before the New Jersey STEP, which is the New Jersey Scholastic Transformative Education and Prison Program, which run higher education into New Jersey's prisons, right? So before, that program came, I had already, involved myself in college, paid for it for myself. And I just put a chip on my shoulder, like I'm gonna be the baddest motherfucker in the class. Excuse my French, but I just had a chip, because I realized how much you know, um, unfortunately, sacrificed, for virtually nothing. I just kind of threw my life away and took somebody's life in the process. So I put a chip on my shoulder to be the best version of myself, and I thought education would be that route. And so I put a chip on my shoulder. So
I love that a chip, an all-star education chip. I love it. Now you also became a paralegal, right, in prison, and
yeah,
so you
yeah.
you sort of helped litigate your case from the inside. What was that like?
So I just knew, Jessica, that the system really like messed me over, right? They really did. Like once I got a little older and calmed down and started reading, I just realized the system just, and not just me. This like it was structural, right? I'm just witnessing, a lot of virtually all most of the prison population being young, young black males. And I was just like, I wanted to figure that out. I wanted to understand, like, how can we as a society just, let this happen? We talk about justice and democracy and everybody's, colorblind. I just seen the hypocrisy. And so, it was an opportunity to take a paralegal course when I was about 25. I took it, killed it, loved it, found my passion. I understood it. I remember helping people in the class who, just had some challenges, right? So I took to it like a fish in water, and I never stopped. I just, got with the older jailhouse lawyers and paralegals. I would ask them stuff, and they'd be like, "Hey, you need to do this. You need to shepherd out this. You need to learn how to Iraq." Just giving me all these little fundamentals, and I just took to it like, "Hey, I'm learning something," and I loved it. And it was my opportunity to kind of like give back. So I would help individuals, with their various legal appeals and talking with their lawyer, doing letters. I just went crazy, as a paralegal. I developed a lot of skill sets in prison. I was a barber, I'm saying I was a mentor, I was a facilitator, but the being a paralegal for me was like that was like my definitive role, because I just love helping people, and helping people helped me understand the system that I had a lot of issues with, and I knew like really, like I said, forget my potty mouth fucked me over, and that it just bothered me, and it bothers me still to this day, and so yeah, I litigated on my own. I litigated on behalf of other prisoners and stuff like that, and so I don't mean to fast track. So when Miller v. Alabama came out, I seen my out. I said, "Oh, this is me," and but I realized instantaneously that I had a big hurdle, which was um, the mandatory life without parole issue. I
Mm-hmm.
was I was given a life sentence, but I wasn't given life without parole, and so I litigated it, and that question came up, and for about 4 or 5 years, us here in New Jersey, matter of fact, more than four, about 6 or 7 years, we, myself and along with PD's office and other attorneys, litigating on behalf of individuals who were juveniles and waived up as adults and given long sentences. Finally, a decision came out here in New Jersey, Zuber, which kind of answered the question. No, we're not going to put substance over form, right? Life without parole is something like akin to 42 years or more, right? That's a like that's the question. We know that's an answer to the question, like so it doesn't have to be a literal life without parole. You're going to die prison situation. It could be any sentence that's 42 years or more. Now, what that did was that hurt me because I had a 35-year life sentence, so I didn't qualify for it. They said, "Oh, you don't have life without parole." You know what I'm saying? So, it's one of those
But
just asinine.
I thought you had a sentence of 50 to life.
Well, yeah, I had 50 to life originally, but I remember I was litigating, going back and forth, and I was remanded probably around 1992, 93, and resentenced to 35 years. So they
Oh,
did knock 15 years off. So I like to tell people I really was sentenced to 50 years, but because I was litigating, I didn't give up. They was like, okay, because they knew they really messed me over, but and somebody showed some compassion and knocked 15 years off, which I'm very thankful for, but it should have been a substantially more decrease by law and by virtue of my rehabilitative strides, but that's neither here nor near there now. But yeah, I didn't qualify for Zuba relief or resentencing because I was 7 years under the de facto life without prison standard.
oh my goodness, look at you. You were successful getting your sentence reduced only to knock yourself out of the Zuber
Not
zone.
exactly.
Oh man. So then what
Yeah,
happened? Because you did get out, right? I mean, I don't want
yeah.
spoiler alert everybody, he
No,
gets
no.
out
Right,
after
right.
35 years. So what happened?
Right. So what happened was I had 35 years to life sentence. So I mean I had to do my mandatory minimum of 35 years, and then I had to begin my life sentence, right? Meaning that I would go up to parole, and parole would decide, okay, you're fit for release, or you're going to do another 5, 10, 15, oh, what,
Hmm.
30 years, like whatever, what I'm saying? Which is a harrowing reality. And which is one of the reasons why I've seen a lot of men die in prison because
Hmm.
they finished the mandatory minimum portion of their sentence, 20 years, 15 years, 25, but parole just never let them out.
Right,
No matter
right.
how, yeah, exactly. Parole just never granted them
No.
parole, despite impeccable rehabilitative strides, substantive transformations and change. So in my mind, I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm going to die in prison. But anyway, I said, you know what? No, my mom said I'm going to get out, so it's going to happen. So, so when my 35 years come up, I say about 2 years, no, about really about 3 years into to I was getting ready for parole is like when I really said, okay, I start putting, because I was at that time I was the office manager at the prison law library. I mean, I was probably like the highest paralegal there, non-civilian. And so I just started delegating my responsibilities out, saying, hey, listen, y'all, you're gonna have to do this, you're gonna have to do this, you're gonna have to oversee this, you're gonna have to administer it. And they like, well, my colleagues was like, well, what's going on? I said, I gotta prepare for parole. I don't have time. Like this is like they were like, well, you go for parole in 2021. This is like, 2018, 2019. I'm like, I'm not playing. I got to start right now. You know what I'm saying? And so, I'm still going to work, but I still this is my
Mm.
priority. And so I just went on a parole preparation journey. Like just everything was on hold. I was doing my homework. I just, I'm so in volume two, I'll talk about that process because I think that can be very, very helpful for individuals in situations, where their only release can be parole and how you must really prepare yourself. I'm talking about internally, spiritually, psychologically, just very, grueling process for me. Like I take things serious, as you can see. I take things very serious. I don't play games, right? That's my strength and my weakness. But yeah, so real fast, going back to that, I had learned that I was going up against 92% denial rate for first time eligible parolees, and that just knocked my socks off a little bit. I was like, man, oh my God, So I said, you know what? It's an 8% chance. That's a little bit of light, right? We always talk about hope. I said, I'm gonna be that 8%, and I took it very seriously. And yeah, and I listen, I gotta toot my own horn. I crushed that parole process. I put them people in a position where if you deny me, like it might be a riots out the street or something, So, I really, just looking back at the audacity that I had, I think was my saving grace. I think they were just mesmerized, like unbelievable. And they actually said it, like they was like, man, what the fuck happened? Like, like when looking at the first 10 years, you were a maniac. And then
Yeah.
the next 25 years, it's just like nothing. And they really wanted an explanation for that. And I knew that contrast would be my saving grace. And so I explained it. And let me tell you something. I explained it theologically through a theological lens, a social scientific lens, a philosophical lens, a legal lens, a lived experience lens. I was just going back and forth, and just to show, my intellectual maturity and acumen, but my social and emotional, states. So I tell individuals, you have to learn how to really articulate yourself from outside of your own, lived experiences. And if you can use different methodologies, like philosophy or religion or the law or, whatever, what I'm saying, as a lens to kind of like present yourself, it can go a long way. And don't ask me how I came up with that strategy. I just felt it, that's what I
Hmm.
needed to do.
Hmm. And you were successful. And so
Oh yeah.
you get out kind of first shot, you're in that 8% like
Yeah.
you wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it had been 35 years. And
35. Yeah.
I'm wondering, what was that like when you were released after 35 years? I mean, the world was just
Mm.
whew, different.
Yeah. Like in prison, like, it's a lot of conditioning going on, it's a very, me personally, I took an approach to prison as if it was, my monastery. I had to become very disciplined. I had to contain my emotions. I had to contain a whole bunch of other urges, right? And so I became, very compressed, so to speak, right? So for me, what that did was, this is a curse and blessing. It was a very beneficial strategy, survival strategy inside, right? Help me
Mm-hmm.
flourish and
Mm-hmm.
thrive. But certain, survival mechanisms or strategies in one world is useless in the other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm learning, how I have to relinquish some of those survival skills and strategies and conditions and habits that I had in there. Out here they're useless, right? But not all of them, right?
Like what?
Particularly the interpersonal ones,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the hardest part. Professionally, I'm killing it. I'm good, right? Socially, I'm still, coming into my own a little bit. It takes me a minute to get I'm very sociable, but on an interpersonal level, I have guards up, and it really
Mm-hmm.
takes a minute for them to come down, and that is very harmful, right? Or not non-conducive to, um, relationships, right? So that's where I struggle at. But that's the only struggle that I really have, and it's because, I facilitate men's group, and this is a phenomenon that's just not, particular to me. Like, we have some real emotional, disabilities after
Mm.
having served 30 something years. So,
Yeah.
in one sense, emotionally, I'm like a monk. I can walk through fire and not scream, right? I'm very disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, dealing with women, I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, right? And
Yeah.
it's very embarrassing, because here it is. I'm a 57-year-old man, but I don't have the coping skills to deal with an interpersonal relationship where emotions are involved. And, so it's a process, so, but yeah, I think I missed your question.
No, I think you got it. I
That was
think you
good.
got
That was
it.
good. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. But you did say you were crushing it professionally. So can we go there
Right.
for just a minute? I mean, you are
Yeah, yeah,
crushing it.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
get out
Right.
2021, you're
Yeah, yeah.
navigating all the things, and you get
Mhm.
hired by the Office of the Public Defender
Yeah, yeah,
as a
yeah, right.
paralegal, right?
Yes.
And I want to talk about what you did as a paralegal, and also you got a promotion to be the
Yes.
community affairs and policy specialist.
Yes.
And so, could you just tell us briefly about sort of what your roles have been at OPD and what you're doing now there?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, I just remember what your previous question was. The day of my release was very overwhelming, but because I was so stoical, it was like I was witnessing it and experiencing it at the same time, right? And later on, even now, I am still decompressing or deinstitutionalizing myself, right? Just want to
Mm-hmm.
say that. But on that day, my first Freedom Day, a lot of my supporters were there, family was there. There was a lot of OPD representatives there, because I had forged relationships with professionals inside. I was
While
making a
you were
name.
fighting, while you
Right.
were fighting for the Zuber
Yeah,
case, you
right,
made a
right.
lot of contacts on the
I made a
outside.
exactly with academically, I had professors, I had social workers, I had all kind of professional people to just say, hey, like, wow, like, you're phenomenal or whatever, right? If anything we can do, say just stay in contact. And I always just stayed in contact, let them know, hey, it wasn't all professional, just sometimes it was personal. Hey, how you doing? How's the kids? So I was building relationships while
Mm-hmm.
inside. And so when I did make my parole date, my first eligibility, they were there to greet me, meet them at the gate. When I stepped out of East Jersey State Prison, it was like close to 50 people, 50 something people there
Amazing.
just to welcome me home. That was just, and so I say that there was a New Jersey Office of Public Defenders was there, lawyers and attorneys. And and so that the first year of my release, while looking for jobs and stuff like that, I became like a resource to them. I just volunteered my time, like, hey, whatever you guys want to do, want me to do. And they would call me and say, hey, because they were using my jailhouse lawyer expertise and paralegal, to their advantage, which I had no problem. And I was behind the scenes doing a lot of work. I helped them with, Coma 1 and Coma 2. cases, which were now successful. In Jersey, Comer 2 allows for a look back for individuals who were sentenced, who were juveniles and sentenced to 30 plus or more years. After 20 years, you could put a motion in for a look back for resentencing. And so it was there working on that, working on those cases. They said, hey, you want to come work for us? We looking for, we can use a paralegal here. And I was like, absolutely. And so within the first year of my release, I started working with the public defenders as an attorney assistant. And I did so well 2 years later, with the new public defender coming in, with the holistic defense approach model. She said, hey, I have a vision where I believe I can use your skill sets. How would you like to be my community affairs and policy specialist? I said, well, what will it entail? And so we sat down and she told me like what that position would entail, and I jumped on it. So it's an inaugural position. And what I really do is it's three capacities. I sit on teams of coalitions that actually try to make policy or change policies, or that aspect. Also, I assist with our legislative affairs and policy unit, who try to sway bad policy from being enacted and good policy to be enacted. I love that portion of the job. And the community affairs aspect is I kind of, work out in the community engagement. I might do expungements with them. I might do it with the office. I assist the community. I'm very accessible to clients in the communities if they have issues with their attorney or if they have issues legally. I'm kind of like the intermediary because we got a lot of different units. We're a statewide institution. So I work to contact or put them into contact with different units of our agency that can address that person's problem. So that's the most busiest part of my job right there. And then the third one is I'm still an attorney assistant and paralegal, still working with resentences for youthful offenders and juveniles. I love that. I'm never going to give that up. I love helping them with their reentry plans, being a mentor, going into the prisons, talking with them, trying to encourage them, and prepping them for parole and prepping them for allocution and resentences. I love that. That's the highlight of my job right there.
That's amazing. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's really amazing when you consider you just got out in 21. It's only
Right.
been 5 years. I mean,
It's
it's
only been
really
5 years. Today is actually my fifth year home. To
welcome
the
home.
day. Yeah,
Happy
thank you so much.
anniversary. Um,
Thank you so much.
that's great. Now
Right.
you published this book, A
Okay.
Beautiful Pain, and
Yes.
I want to talk about this before.
Okay.
To be honest, listeners,
Yes.
we're not going to get to everything because Sharuka's a fascinating guy, and there's a lot I want to talk to him about, but we're not going to get to all of it. But I do want to talk about your memoir.
Okay.
You wrote this book, A Beautiful Pain,
Yes.
and what does that mean? Where did you get the inspiration for that title from?
In prison, you do a lot of contemplation and reflection. And remember, as I said, I approached my imprisonment as if it was a monastery, right? So I really did a deep self excavation job on my psyche. I was prepared to go places in my psyche that I think a lot of people run from, that you don't want to know about yourself. I wanted to
Hmm.
know about myself. So I used that time to like really confront myself. You know what I'm saying? I disappointed so many people and I wanted to know why I would disappoint. How could a human being disappoint people that love you? How could you be so selfish? So I really wanted to answer those questions. And, some of the things that I came up with, Jessica, was that I ran from challenges. The moment something got challenging or adverse or sticky, I just tapped out. I quit. But I knew I
Mm,
wasn't a quitter, right? So, I
hmm.
always knew that about me. And, but for whatever reason, I just didn't persevere on. And so finally in my life, I realized like, there's a trial by fire. Like you can't be afraid of the fire. You know what I'm saying? You got to
Hmm.
trust that. You just got to trust. You have to move with a certain trust about yourself that I can endure whatever I need to endure, whether it's pain, whether it's hurt, whether it's tragedy, or whether it's growth. Now, growth is painful, and that's really where the beautiful pain comes in because I knew in order for me to grow, I was going to have to deal with some painful shit. I was gonna
Mm-hmm.
have to shed off some thought processes. I was gonna have to shed off some bad thinking. I was gonna have to
Mm-hmm.
shed a bad mindset. I was gonna have to shed people
Mm.
that was in my company because I outgrew them. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
this is a painful. That's what I mean. It's a beautiful pain. You have to be able to confront decisions that you know are going to be very painful, very difficult, very challenging, but you have to do it. So I say run towards the beautiful pain. And I remember just saying that, run towards the beautiful pain. I was like, you know what? This is going to be the title of my book, because this is what I'm doing. I'm running towards that beautiful pain of which once I do it, once I overcome it, it's like markers to like my growth, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah.
Like a snake sheds their skin,
Yeah.
there's that's a remnant of their growth. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So every time I run towards a beautiful pain and overcome some challenge, there's a shedding that memorializes or my growth. So
Yeah. So it's a powerful title. It really is. And when you wrote it, who'd you
yes.
write it for? Did you write it for yourself? Were you hoping
Mhm.
it would
Uh,
inspire others? Like, what was
right.
why'd
Yeah,
you
the
write it?
motivate, all of that. I needed to write it because a few of my mentors, every time that I became a facilitator or was put in a position of leadership, I never thought I was a leader. Like,
Mm.
but my mother used to tell me, like, I always seen it in you. Oh, she said, I just thought you was going to be, some leader of something. Like, I just knew it. I never seen it, right? And so people always appointed me as being to be in a leadership position. And so I kind of grew into that, and became very humble. But so I wrote the book because I needed to tell my story because people will always put me in those positions and say, yo, you got a great story and you got to tell it. Like you can be an
Mm-hmm.
inspiration for individuals, not just who have legal problems, but just in life in general, like life challenges. Everybody doesn't deal with adversity the same. Adversity introduces it to yourself, and some people run from that and they never really truly get to know themselves. So I wrote the book because one, I needed to get my story out. I needed to show men, women, people, whoever, that it's okay to be vulnerable, right? Like you,
Mm-hmm.
you thinking you suffered the worst trauma in your life. If you heard other people's story, you'll be like me, like, oof. I called my mother one day and said, man, thank you for protecting me. Because people will
Mm.
confide in me some of the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences they had with trauma and abuses. And I'm like, man, like if that stuff would have happened to me, it would have just crushed me,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
What people
It's yeah, you understand what I'm saying, Jay?
I
I know it
do.
would have crushed me, and so I remember calling my mom one day and just thanking her. I must have been about like 29 years old. And she'd be like, what? I said, for protecting me. I said, we didn't have much and I wore tattered clothes and holy sneakers and holy socks. I said, but boy, you protected us. And so I wrote the book to just provide inspiration to people, like, yo, you are not your worst moment in life, period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We are human beings and we have been blessed with the ability to overcome our worst selves and our worst conditions. So I wrote the book just to try to be an inspiration and to be a living example of, vulnerability. There's a certain strength that comes with vulnerability. Because when I wrote that book, that was another shedding. That was a beautiful pain in and of itself.
I
To
can
tell people
imagine.
about, to tell people about your most traumatic events, your most personal and traumatic events. That for me, that was very cathartic because now I never walked in shame, but to know that, you know, I shared something with a lot of that I know a lot of people are very shameful about, and have probably made some bad decisions as a result of. And I just try to use that opportunity, this book, as an opportunity to empower people. It's all about perception. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
No, it's a brave book, and I think writing a memoir is really hard. And
mhm,
some of the stuff you talk about, I mean,
yeah,
it had to be really, really hard to
mhm,
write about. And
yeah.
listeners, I will provide a link for his book in the show
Oh,
notes in case you are interested in
oh,
getting a
thank you.
copy. It's well
Well,
worth a
yeah,
read.
DamonDVenable.com. Thank you. Yeah, just put it out there on verbally, but I appreciate you
Yeah.
putting that link. It goes directly
Oh
to
yeah.
my website.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'll make
Hey,
sure to
thank
do
you.
that. Now, one of the things about you, like you've been so remarkable in your career and all that you've accomplished so far in these 5 years that you've been out and all that you've accomplished while you were in,
Right.
you really have a unique perspective because you've lived both sides of this criminal legal system. Someone who it failed, someone who was caught in it, and now someone who's fighting to fix it and to help be a light for repair. And I'm just wondering, sort of, what are the things that inspire you now, and what are the things that really bother you that keep you up at night? Like, what's your thoughts about the system having such a unique perspective?
Hey, thank you. That's a boy, Jessica. That's a wonderful question. And the first thing that I think of is that April is just second chance month, right? Me personally, I think I'm driven to be kind of, like a poster child for second chances, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I just have like it goes back to that chip I was telling you about. I really have a chip on myself, to change the narrative, right? To change that mythology about young black and brown men, boys and stuff like that, right? As being, irredeemable and violent and, just the boogeymen, so to speak, of this society.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have a very, very strong chip on my shoulder to, again, change that deconstruct, debunk, and destroy that mythology, that false mythology and false narrative. And so, here we are, second chances is thrown around a lot, right? And so my thing is like, okay, what is second chance? So what motivates me is to have a conversation about, let's flush that out. What does second chance mean? Just, y'all just giving people access or forgiving people? And I say, it's yes and no. It's yes, but we have to do more. So for me, I always try to express that it's about something deeper that lived experience operates, not as a liability, but but as a form of professional expertise
Mm-hmm.
that can fundamentally, improve outcomes for people. We serve because I'm not a lawyer, but I'm in public defense, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
that is my realm, that is my profession, and so I try to use my professional expertise to deliver some favorable, needed, justice-oriented outcomes for individuals because the system is terrible. It really is. I mean, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. I mean, as you know, this is, your podcast, Just Justice. So you probably, probably, you're probably more well versed in the injustices that take part in the system than I am. And so I just, I'm out here in this world right now, just, really trying to deliver some justice.
Sharuka, tell me what are the things you're thinking about that are so broken with this